My name is Margaret. I am 68 years old. And 3 months ago, my own son looked me in the eye in front of 200 people and told me I did not belong there. I want to tell you exactly what happened. Not because I am angry anymore, I am past that now, but because I think some of you need to hear this. And maybe, if you are living the version of my life that I lived for 40 years, this story will give you something I never had: a warning. I became a mother at 23. My husband, Gerald, was a good man in the beginning. Quiet, steady, worked at a shipping company outside of Columbus. We had our son, David, in 1982, and our daughter, Claire, 2 years after that. Those early years were simple. Not easy, but simple. I was a registered nurse working night shifts at Riverside Hospital. Gerald worked days. We passed the children between us like a relay race, barely sleeping, barely speaking, but keeping everything moving. When David was 9 and Claire was 7, Gerald left. There was no dramatic scene, no screaming. He just packed 2 bags on a Tuesday morning while I was sleeping after a night shift, left a note on the kitchen counter that said he needed to find himself, and drove away in the blue Chevy we had bought together the year before. I never heard from him again. Not once. Not a birthday card for the children, not a dollar of child support, nothing. He disappeared so completely that for years I wondered if I had invented the whole marriage. I did not have time to fall apart. I had 2 children who needed to eat breakfast the next morning. What most people do not know about nurses is that we learn very quickly how to operate under impossible conditions. We learn to compartmentalize. We learn to function when everything inside us is breaking. I took that skill home from the hospital and I applied it to my life. I grieved Gerald in the car on the way to work. I cried in the parking garage before my shifts, and then I dried my eyes, walked through those hospital doors, and I took care of my patients like nothing had happened. I also started paying very close attention to money, not because I had any. Lord knows I did not have any. After Gerald left, I was working double shifts just to keep us in the house. But I started listening. I listened when the physicians talked about their investment properties. I listened when the hospital administrator mentioned the real estate firm that owned the building we worked in. I read every book I could find on personal finance, on investing, on real estate. I read them during my breaks, in the parking lot before shifts, after the children were asleep. I want to explain something here, because I know what some of you are already thinking. How does a nurse on a single income manage to do any of this? The honest answer is that I was ruthless about what I spent and what I did not. I drove the same car for 14 years. I cut my own hair until the children were in high school. I never took a vacation. Every dollar I did not absolutely need went into a savings account. And when that savings account reached a certain number, I moved it into something that could grow. My first investment was a small duplex in a neighborhood nobody wanted in 1994. I paid $32,000 for it. I rented both units. The rent covered the mortgage and left me $112 a month. That does not sound like much. But I bought another one 3 years later, and then another. I never told my children about any of it, not because I was hiding from them, but because I did not want them to feel like we were wealthy when we were not yet. I wanted them to understand the value of working for what you had, so I kept our home life exactly the same, modest, careful. I packed their lunches. We shopped at discount stores. They wore hand-me-downs until they were old enough to work their own part-time jobs. What I gave them? I gave them deliberately and specifically. David wanted to go to Ohio State. I paid for it in full, but I told him I had taken out a parent loan, that I was working extra shifts to cover it, because I wanted him to appreciate that education instead of treating it like a given. He believed me. Claire wanted to go to nursing school in Pittsburgh. I paid for that too. Same story. When David got married at 27 to a woman named Sandra, I contributed $30,000 to their wedding. I said it was money I had saved over many years. That was true. It just was not the whole truth. By the time my children were in their 30s, I owned 11 rental properties across central Ohio. I had also invested in a small medical clinic partnership that, over 20 years, had grown into something considerably larger than I had ever expected. The clinic group was held under a business entity called Lakeview Health Partners. My name was not on any public-facing documents. I had structured it that way intentionally, on the advice of an attorney named Ruth, who had become one of my closest friends. Ruth always said that the best kind of wealth is the kind that does not announce itself. My children knew me as their mother. A retired nurse, a woman who drove a practical sedan, lived in the same house she had owned for 30 years, wore comfortable shoes, and brought store-bought cookies to family dinners because she claimed she never had time to bake. That is who they saw when they looked at me. That is who they had decided I was. I do not blame them entirely for that. I built that version of me very carefully, but I will tell you this. I always believed that who I was underneath the image, the work ethic, the discipline, the love I had poured into them for decades, that all of that should have been enough. You should not need to know your mother is wealthy to treat her with dignity. That is something I believed for a long time. I am not sure I believe it with the same certainty anymore. The trouble started, as trouble often does in families, with a house. My mother had left me a small property in her will, a lake house in Michigan that had been in our family since the 1960s. It was not worth a fortune, but it was worth something, and more importantly, it was ours. I had taken my children there every summer when they were small. David had learned to fish off that dock. Claire had her first kiss somewhere near that boathouse, though she still denies it. That house was full of everything we had ever been as a family. When my mother passed and the property came to me, I made the decision to keep it. I had the resources to maintain it, and I thought perhaps one day it might mean something to my grandchildren the way it had meant something to us. David did not agree. He called me on a Sunday afternoon in February, and within the first 4 minutes of the conversation, he had already suggested, gently at first and then less gently, that holding on to the lake house was impractical, that the property taxes alone were a burden for someone on a fixed retirement income, that he and Sandra had looked into it and believed the house could sell for somewhere between $300,000 and $350,000, which, he said, would give me a very comfortable cushion. He used the word cushion 3 times. I counted. I told him I was not interested in selling. He paused for a moment, and then he said something that I have not forgotten. "Mom, you need to be realistic about your situation." My situation. I thanked him for his concern, told him I would think about it, and ended the call. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that. Claire called 2 days later. She had clearly spoken with her brother, because she used almost identical language. Fixed income, property taxes, realistic. She added one thing David had not said. She told me, very carefully, that she and her husband Marcus had been hoping to eventually have a vacation property, and that if I was planning to let the lake house go, they would love to have the first conversation about purchasing it. At a fair price, she added. Of course, at a fair price. I want you to understand the particular quality of what I felt in that moment. It was not rage. It was something quieter and more unsettling than rage. It was recognition. I was seeing, very clearly, how my children saw me, as a resource to be managed, as an obligation to be optimized, as someone whose decisions needed to be overseen because she could no longer be trusted to make them wisely. I was 68 years old. I had spent 45 years managing resources and making decisions under conditions that would break most people, and my children were calling me on back-to-back days to suggest, with great gentleness, that I needed their help figuring out what to do with my own property. I told Claire the same thing I had told David. I would think about it. What I actually did was call Ruth. Ruth had been my attorney for 22 years, and my friend for longer than that. She was 71, still practicing, and had the particular quality of brilliant women of a certain age of saying exactly what she meant without decoration. When I told her about the calls, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Margaret, how long are you planning to keep playing small?" I did not have an answer for that. The gala was David's idea. He had joined the board of a nonprofit called the Central Ohio Medical Foundation about 2 years earlier, a foundation that provided funding for rural healthcare access across the state. It was genuinely good work, and I was proud of him for being involved. Every spring, the foundation hosted a fundraising gala at the Brennan Event Center in downtown Columbus, a beautiful old building that had been renovated about 5 years ago. Black tie, live auction, the kind of evening that raised serious money and made everyone in the room feel important and generous simultaneously. David had called me in January to tell me about this year's gala. He was serving on the planning committee, and he was excited. He spoke for 15 minutes about the venue, the menu, the keynote speaker they had secured. And then, Toward the end of the call, he mentioned that the event was invitation only this year due to space constraints, that they were really focused on maximizing the donor presence in the room, that he hoped I understood. I told him of course I understood. What David did not know, what neither of my children had ever known, was that Lakeview Health Partners had been a founding donor of the Central Ohio Medical Foundation. We had contributed the initial capital that established the endowment 11 years ago. My name was not on any plaques. The donation had been made under the company name. Every year since, we had been the foundation's largest single institutional donor. I knew the foundation's executive director, a woman named Patricia Chen, personally. We had lunch twice a year. She knew exactly who I was and what Lakeview's involvement meant to the organization. The Gala committee, however, was populated mostly by board members who had joined in recent years, including my son, who apparently had never connected the name on the largest donor line of the foundation's annual report to his own mother. I thought about saying nothing. I thought about simply not going. I thought about calling Patricia and asking her to quietly ensure I had a seat, and then sitting in the back and watching the evening unfold from a distance. But I thought about Ruth's question. How long are you planning to keep playing small? I called Patricia. I explained the situation. I did not dramatize it. I told her my son was on the planning committee, that he had not invited me under the impression that I was simply his retired mother, with no particular connection to the foundation, and that I thought it might be instructive for everyone involved if things were allowed to proceed naturally on the evening of the event. Patricia laughed for a long time. Then she said, "Margaret, I have been waiting 11 years for people to find out who you are. You have my full cooperation." The evening of the gala was in the second week of April. I dressed carefully. I wore a deep green dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, with a single strand of pearls that had belonged to my mother. I had my hair done that morning. I looked. I thought, exactly like what I was. A woman who had nothing to prove and knew it. I arrived at the Brennan Center at 7:15. The room was already full. I could see David near the front, standing with Sandra and several other board members, laughing at something, comfortable and at ease in the way people are when they feel completely in control of their environment. Claire and Marcus were at the same table. She was wearing a blue dress I had not seen before. I was stopped at the entrance by a young man with a tablet who was checking names against the guest list. I gave him my name. He scrolled again, looked up apologetically. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm not seeing a Margaret Hollis on the list." "That's all right," I said. "Could you tell Miss Patricia Chen that Margaret is here? She'll know." He looked uncertain but excused himself. I waited near the entrance. Across the room, David spotted me. I watched his expression shift surprise first, then something I can only describe as the particular discomfort of someone who has been caught mid-assumption. He said something to Sandra and began making his way toward me. He reached me just as the young man returned. "Mom," David said, and his voice had that careful, managing quality I had been hearing a lot lately. "What are you doing here?" "This event is, I told you, it's invitation only." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we have a seat for you. The tables are all assigned, and the room is at capacity. I can call you a car, and we can have dinner together next week, and I'll tell you all about Mr. Hollis." The young man with the tablet was back. Behind him was Patricia Chen, in a silver dress, smiling with the full warmth of someone who has been anticipating a moment for quite some time. "Margaret," she said, and took both of my hands. "I am so glad you came. We have your seat at the head table. I should have called you months ago to formally confirm that was entirely our oversight." David stared. "The head table?" he said. Patricia turned to him with the pleasant, measured expression of a woman who is very good at managing complex rooms. "David, I don't think you've ever formally met our founder. This is Margaret Hollis. Lakeview Health Partners, which Margaret established, provided the foundational endowment for this organization 11 years ago. Without that initial commitment, there would be no gala to plan." She paused just briefly. "We consider Margaret family here?" I watched my son's face go through several things in quick succession. Confusion, recalculation, a dawning comprehension that rearranged everything he thought he knew about the coordinates of his own life. Claire had appeared at his shoulder somewhere during Patricia's introduction. She had heard enough. Her face had gone very still in the way faces go still when the ground shifts unexpectedly. "Mom," she said. "You Lakeview is yours?" "Lakeview is mine," I said. "But you told us you said you were on a fixed income. You said the lake house was a financial burden. You said—" "I said I would think about it," I told her. "I never agreed with your assessment of my situation." Patricia guided me gently toward the head table. I walked through that room past the round tables with their white linens and centerpieces, past the board members and the donors and the community leaders, and I felt something I had not felt in longer than I could name. I felt exactly like myself. Dinner was served. I sat between Patricia and a cardiologist named Dr. Warren Ellis, who turned out to be wonderful company. We talked about the Foundation's Rural Clinic Expansion Project, about a new mobile unit that would serve 3 counties that currently had no primary care access within 30 miles. We talked about his research and my years at Riverside, and the particular satisfaction of a career spent actually helping people rather than simply administering help from a distance. My children were 2 tables away. I did not look at them often. When I did, they were quiet. The program began after dinner. Patricia gave remarks. A video played showing the communities the Foundation served a woman in her 70s in Vinton County who drove 90 minutes round trip for a routine blood pressure check, a young father in Morgan County whose daughter had been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes and who had nowhere nearby to get her properly managed. These were the people the Foundation existed for. These were the people my money had been working for, quietly, for 11 years. And then Patricia said, "Tonight, we want to take a moment to honor someone who made all of this possible. Someone who has supported this organization from its very beginning, who has never once sought recognition for that support, and who I am honored to call a friend. This year, we are establishing the Margaret Hollis Founders Award to be given annually to an individual who exemplifies the values of quiet service and sustained commitment. Margaret, would you please come up?" I walked to the podium in a room that was applauding, and I looked out at 200 faces. I found my children's faces in the crowd. David's expression was not one I had ever seen on him before. It was not shame exactly. It was something more complicated. It was the face of a man who was revising a story he had been telling himself for a long time. I spoke for 5 minutes. I talked about the nurses I had worked beside for 30 years, about what it means to care for people who have no one else to advocate for them, about why I believed that access to basic health care was not a privilege, but a foundation on which everything else in a life was built. I thanked Patricia. I thanked the board. And I said one thing that I want to write out here exactly as I said it, because I meant every word. I am not telling this story to impress anyone. I am telling it because I spent 40 years being underestimated by the world, and I want every woman in this room who has ever been told that her situation requires someone else's management to understand something. Your situation is yours. Your decisions are yours, and the value of a life is not located in what other people can see. I got a standing ovation. I am not telling you that to boast. I am telling you that because my son was on his feet, and I watched him stand, and I thought about all the years I had given him, and I felt grief and love and something like closure all at once. Afterward, there was a reception. People I had never met shook my hand and told me what the Foundation's work meant to their communities. A young woman who worked at one of the rural clinics told me her mother had been a patient there and that it had changed their family's life. I held her hand, and I did not think about David and Claire at all during that conversation. I was fully present for that young woman, the way I had tried to be fully present for every patient I had ever had. It was near the end of the evening when my son found me. He did not say anything for a moment. He stood beside me near the window that looked out onto the city, and we were both quiet, and I let the silence be what it was. "I didn't know," he finally said. "I know you didn't. Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about how to answer that. I had thought about it, actually, for a long time before that evening. "Because I wanted you to respect me for who I was," I said, "not for what I had, and when I started to realize that you didn't, I stopped." I looked at him. He was 52 years old. He had Gerald's jawline and my eyes and a life that I had funded almost entirely while he believed he had built it himself. I needed to understand that clearly. Before I decided what to do next, he looked at the city for a while. "The lake house," he said, "is staying in the family?" I said. "As I told you." He nodded. Claire found us 10 minutes later. She had been crying, which was not something I had seen from her in years. She was not a woman who cried easily. She hugged me in the way she had hugged me when she was small, with her whole body, and she said she was sorry, and I told her I knew, and we stood there together for a while without saying much else. I want to be honest with you about what the months after that evening have been like, because I think it matters. It has not been a perfect resolution. Families do not resolve like stories. My son and I have had several very difficult conversations since the gala. There have been moments of real honesty that have been uncomfortable for both of us. David has had to reckon with the fact that the life he was proud of having built was significantly underwritten by a woman he had started to treat as a liability, and that reckoning is not a comfortable thing to sit with. I have had to reckon with my own role in what happened, with the ways that keeping my full self hidden from my children may have taught them, inadvertently, that there was nothing more there to see. These are not simple things, but something has shifted between us, something real. My son calls me now not to manage my situation, but to talk to me, actually talk to me, about his work and his worries and the things he is proud of. Claire has started asking me questions about Lakeview, about the foundation, about what it was like to build something over 40 years without anyone knowing you were doing it. She wants to understand. That hunger to understand is something new, and I am grateful for it. I have made decisions about my estate, the majority of my assets, the properties, the Lakeview Partnership shares, the foundation endowment commitments will go to the Central Ohio Medical Foundation when I am gone. I have established a trust that will provide for my children's stability without providing for their inertia. There is a difference between giving your children a foundation to stand on and building their whole floor for them, and I learned that difference too late to undo it, but not too late to think about it clearly. The lake house I am keeping. This summer, I am taking my grandchildren there for 2 weeks. David's youngest is 8, which is exactly the age David was when he first learned to fish off that dock. I intend to teach her the same way I taught him, with a cane pole and a bucket of night crawlers, and as much patience as the afternoon requires. That house is full of everything we have ever been. I am not finished adding to it yet. I am 68 years old. I spent 45 years making myself smaller than I was so that the people around me would feel comfortable, and I am here to tell you that the cost of that is higher than you think it is. Not just for yourself, for the people you are small for, because when you let people believe you are only what they can see, you rob them of the chance to know you. And knowing someone really knowing them is the whole thing. It is the only thing. I am a retired nurse. I am a landlord. I am a founding donor. I am a mother and a grandmother and a friend. I am a woman who drove the same car for 14 years and read finance books on her lunch breaks and cried in parking garages and kept going anyway. I am all of those things at the same time. I always was. Thank you for being here. If this story reached something in you, I hope you'll stay with us here at Luna Stories. We're just getting started. Leave me a comment and tell me, has someone in your life ever underestimated you? I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.